put a paper under my chair, so I think I can just sit down
Now you're
and do
voting
it
for
from
the
my chair.
For all of you Bronco fans.
I'm a 49er fan.
And 49er fans.
I think
Oh, yeah, it's even
that's just
worse.
plumb hurtful
That's even
towards
worse.
Sean. That's a direct shot towards Sean.
It is.
I'm sorry, Sean.
That was a tough one.
That really was.
Oh,
They had it.
okay.
Yeah.
They really had it.
Yeah, just pass it down.
Until the very end.
Thank you.
He's a man.
Yes.
It's like, those look nice.
Travel plans.
Oh, okay. Where are you traveling to?
But yeah, for all of you Bronco fans.
I think you're just so funny.
Steve's gonna get beat up.
Do what?
I said, you just think you're so funny.
Absolutely. Well, once in 50 years, I mean.
Yeah.
Another 50 years I'll go again.
What happened 50 years ago?
Chiefs
How
won a
did that play
Super Bowl.
out?
Kansas City beat Minnesota.
Oh, it was 50. Yeah, it was the year before.
They're like a
The
comet. They come
Packers
around
beat
once every 50 years.
No, the year before is when Willie Joe and the Jets beat the Colts.
Oh, so it was 70. Okay.
All right, we're already running quite a few minutes behind, so you guys want to get going?
Oh, going off to work, huh?
Darn.
All right, does anybody have any items from the last council meeting that they want to go over or discuss or review? All right, I'll take that as a no. Okay, IMS pavement management report.
All right. Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council, good evening. You should have gotten in your packets the report provided by the IMS pavement effort that took place a number of weeks ago. This data is a result of that equipment that you may have seen run around town, sort of taking a survey of the physical conditions, if you will, of our street surfaces, and in fact looked a lot like the van you see there on the screen. The report that you got back provides a lot of great detail as it relates to our street surfaces throughout the community, and really good inventory as well. One of the pieces of information that I found really interesting was with regard to the comparative rate of investment and where we fall in regards to the investment that we make into our streets here in the community. I was disappointed to learn that we are below the national average as it relates to those investments. And you know, despite the multiple millions of dollars that we spend each year on streets and street improvements and repairs and replacements and so on, I believe that number is at like 59%, if I remember correctly, and our consultant can tell us differently if I'm wrong, but as you all know, I really like good, clean, non-pitted pavement. And so it's easy for me to advocate for, but it's such a tough thing to balance with respect to public safety and some of the other demands on the limited funds that we have, particularly in the 1 cent program. But anyhow, with regard to this data, we did invite our consultants over to visit with us and to share with us some of the other things that are in the report that would be of interest to you. This certainly is an opportunity to ask some questions as it relates to their data that they collected and amassed. And so this is your opportunity to bring up whatever information you'd like to bring up and talk about and investigate and so on. If there's homework that we need to do additionally, you know, please feel free to task us with that. The good news with regard to all this information is I plan to use this information to prioritize street projects as we come forward to you in the future. And I think it's a good battery of information to allow us to do that. And so with that, if I could turn the time over to Mr. Beamer and our consultants, I'd sure appreciate it.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, Council. It was actually several months ago, almost a year ago, when we inked a contract with IMS to take a look at our entire roadway network. We have done historically for our arterials and collectors, but that's been with in-house staff for the last probably last decade or more. We've done our arterials and collectors, and it's been very subjective. We go out and we go, yes, that roadway's in poor condition, and it's 3 different graders, and if they hopefully they all agree generally, and we average those numbers out, and we get a raw score, and we take a look at that. Jim Torek with IMS is here to give you a quick PowerPoint presentation, but we looked at the entire street network, arterials and collectors, and every residential street in our community. This van here measured rutting, roughness. They visually determined the amount of cracking. They measured the pavement width. If there was curb and gutter adjacent to it, if it was not curb and gutter. So it's a very comprehensive report, and I think it hijacked your packet with 300-some pages of very raw data. If you want to take a look at individual streets and individual blocks, that data is in that packet for you to take a look at as to, I wonder how my street compares to the other streets. But with that, I will introduce Jim with IMS. He flew here from sunny Phoenix, I believe. So he is now enjoying the nice warming weather. So, Jim.
He's getting a first-hand look at the wear and tear on our streets.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Again, Jim Turek with IMS, Infrastructure Management Services. Our company has been doing pavement management condition surveys and analysis for 35 years. It's all we do, and we're feeling that we're really good at it. And I'm pleased to share the results of our recent project that we wrapped up a couple months back with you folks. Make sure I've got this rolling.
I'm sure it works.
I got on.
Word?
I tested it just real quick.
And it was recording. I must have broken it. Sorry about that.
Oops. If not, I will simply hit the enter button.
That's why you get paid.
Oh, here it goes.
Is it connected now? Yes. Okay. So I'll be talking about our methodology for doing the data collection, how we went about the condition analysis, as well as the budget analysis. Starting off with the scale of investment, the network itself, 285 centerline miles, regardless of number of lanes, so that's down the center line, 285, which equates to roughly 6 million square yards of pavement. It's the single largest city asset, valued at roughly $1.9 million per mile, or $555 million total. And that's without improvements, things like right-of-way, bridges, the land value itself, sidewalks, that's excluded from that number. An early look at the pavement condition index, the PCI, as mentioned, yes, 59 is where that fell for the network, which is considered fair. And then another number worthy of discussing is the backlog. Backlog is a pavement condition index of 40 or below, no longer eligible for an overlay. It would require a full or partial reconstruct, very expensive, at $1.9 million. And that percentage of the network is 13.5. We like to target that at or below 15%. Quick high view of what pavement management is. Over the course, the red curve is a typical deterioration of a pavement. And over the course of the first 40% of the pavement life, it deteriorates at a rate of roughly 15% in quality. Conversely, over the next 15% of the pavement life, it drops at 40% in quality. So the lesson there is to do frequent treatments early and often, as opposed to delaying and deferring the rehab, which would be more expensive. So keeping it in its good condition while it's good is much more cost effective. As far as the concept of pavement management, starts with the city objectives, policy, and budgets. We then contracted with the city to do the data collection. From there, provide priorities, analysis techniques, and reporting, and in turn, back to the city to reevaluate its policies and budget scenarios. Again, that deterioration curve, this is a quick illustration of the different ranges of pavement condition index along the y-axis over the course of time for asphalt pavement, roughly 50 years, going from 100 to near zero, anywhere from excellent to very good, down to good, fair, and marginal, and then poor and very poor. So as mentioned, we did mobilize one of our laser road surface testers, RST, which does collect roughness, wheel path running, alligator cracking, transverse longitudinal cracking, patching, potholes, when it comes to concrete, divided slabs, corner breaks, things like that. And what we've done with some of the imagery that we collected while driving all 285 centerline miles of road was group the different descriptive terms and captured an example image of each. In this case, Columbia River Road with a pavement condition index of 89, so like new, with some lightweight treatment. It will remain in very good condition for several years. Next, Good Road, a pavement condition index of 63, some transverse cracking, moderate longitudinal cracking as well, starting to see some deterioration there. And then marginal roads, PCI of 43, barely still a candidate for an overlay, but wheel path alligator cracking, longitudinal cracking again. This happens to be Brookview Drive. And here's a similar PCI, but at 36. Severe alligator cracking is showing up in this particular road. And then a very poor road, PCI of 9. So no real strategy here other than at some point, hopefully, a full reconstruct. Not much can be done until funding is available, other than making sure that safety concerns are addressed. This is the area, or graph of the roads by area using those same descriptive terms. Good, fair, poor, or actually anywhere from very poor to excellent. Typically, the distribution is skewed a little more to the right. So in your network, we have a few more in the poor and marginal categories, and meaning more over in the excellent category, if you will. When we look at this breakdown by descriptive terms, there's 3 metrics of health that we like to look at. The first is that overall pavement condition network number. Again, you're at 59. The typical nationwide average we see is between 60 and 65, so close but just below. The second metric we look at are those roads in the excellent category. We like to see that at or above 15%. We're looking roughly at 4% here. It's a good indicator of a network being fully funded or near fully funded and being able to take care of the full swath of bars, if you will. So being able to take care of some of the reconstructs, the overlays, et cetera, and pushing those into that excellent categories. Because as I mentioned earlier, that 15% of time deterioration, the marginal and fair, those are the ones that are deteriorating quickly and wanting to move over left into the reconstruct categories. And then the third metric of health is the backlog. We talked about that at 13.5%. Want to keep that at or below 15%. As you get into 20%, it becomes insurmountable. Now you have 1/5 of your network needing to be reconstructed, and the cost to do that is just overwhelming. Here's an illustrative map of the roads throughout the city using a color coding where green is good, red is bad, and all colors in between, just to give you a general sense of the overall network health. So a fair amount of green, some of it's light. I think that's partly driving down the overall number, and a fair amount of red that is forcing that PCI just below 60. So when we talk about analysis and project planning for the city, funding is not zero, it's not unlimited, although we do run those funding scenarios just to have benchmarks. And then we run several different funding scenarios in between. We know that the city puts a value on the roadway network, as mentioned earlier, and prioritized based on functional class. So arterials are given a higher priority than collectors, and collectors a higher priority than locals. One of the things we did was identify the annual budget to maintain the current PCI and to maintain the current backlog. And we also examined the effects of the current funding levels. Over the course of 5 years, where will you be at that current funding level? We want to make sure that we're preventing deterioration in the pavement quality. So again, making sure that the funding is at a steady state so we're not losing ground is important. A couple of footnotes about the numbers that were run. ADA compliance, a pretty costly component of doing pavement management, is not included in these numbers. So where overlays are being planned and completed, typically the ramps are also needing to be upgraded to the latest standards. Those costs are not included. nor is inflation. So these are present dollar numbers that we're showing. And finally, another footnote, pavement management is priority based. So what we want to do is grab projects in their need year. By that I mean before they fall into a more expensive treatment. Spending the money as wisely as possible before they become a more expensive rehab strategy. And it's not worst first. By worst first, that would be for your network, doing the worst 2 miles of the roadway network, and leaving and doing a full reconstruct, but on the remaining 283 miles, not touching them. So not a great plan, but that would be a worst first approach. Rehab condition analysis budget models. So these are deterioration curves assigned to each segment based on its functional class, based on the pavement type, and based on its relative strength of pavement. So each segment in the network is assigned a unique curve in that regard, and it deteriorates based on the curve shown here. In a similar fashion, we also addressed with the city the unit rates for each of the rehab strategies. The list is there. It's less critical the terminology used for each, but to assign the appropriate dollar amount for each rehab strategy is critical, and we work with the city on that. Not just for a typical local road, but also applying a factor for the different functional classes, because there's a little additional work there. And highlighted in red, we have the minimum PCI we would recommend using that particular treatment, as well as a maximum. And then the current PCI, which is the need year. I talked about grabbing it in its need year. That's how we know it is in its critical year, and if there's funding, the recommendation would be to capture that particular project or segments. Here's another look at the network, but broken out based on functional class. We have state highways averaging a PCI of 61, the minor arterials at 66, collectors came in at 67, and then typically locals are on the lower end. In this case, they are. 56 was the average of the local network. Pretty powerful graph in that it takes all of the work that was done and puts it in a nice, clean graph. The blue diagonal line is unique to the city of Casper. It's all the different funding scenarios, again from 0 to, in this case, $10 million. And that diagonal line then allows us to look at the x-axis, which is an annual funding in millions, or thousands, but thousands, so millions. And then the effective post-rehab PCI after 5 years of funding at that particular level. Starting from left to right is the city's current budget, roughly $3.7 million. Where the city will be in 5 years is a PCI of 54, so dropping roughly 1 point per year, and the backlog will jump to 25, almost double. So certainly a cause for concern in that regard. A steady state PCI, meaning maintaining the PCI of 59, would require a $6.6 million annual spend, and the backlog would jump up to 18%. The next one of note is the PCI Control Budget. That's a $7.5 million spend, and the backlog goes to 16%. So the recommended budget is also right there. The budget is basically on top of each other, roughly $7.5 million. PCI, that minimum 60 that we recommend, as well as a backlog, in this case it's 16%. One tick above that 15, but that's still a big jump, double of where it is currently. And then maintaining the current backlog, that 13.5% that we're currently at, would require an $8.5 million. Not going to spend a lot of time on this graph, other than to note that anytime we're spending less than that steady state, we're pulling equity out of this large asset, which, you know, from a financial standpoint, needs to be repaid at some point somehow. Where you're currently at, pulling roughly $1 million out of the network on an annual basis. Recommendations from INS for the city of Casper: maintaining that PCI at 60 and the backlog at or below 15%. Reiterating the current budget of $3.7 million will achieve a 54 PCI and a backlog of 25 over 5 years, and that the recommended budget is $7.5 million and a PCI of 60 with a backlog of 16% over the course of 5 years. Also recommend a full suite of rehab strategies reviewed on an annual basis, as well as using steady and effective rehabs and maintenance on an annual basis rather than deferring maintenance, because again, those are more expensive approaches of going about it. And then finally, the city should review their streets every few years, update the condition data, as well as the rehab program in its totality. With that, I'll turn it back to any questions.
Go ahead.
It looks like essentially, in order to gain a little bit on the 59 PCI, we're looking at having to double the amount of money we put in streets.
Because of how much of the network is shifted to the left and continuing to move that way? Yeah. It's not always that case, but because of the makeup
Looking
of
at
the network,
cities that are
yes.
similar in size to ours, that have similar freeze-thaw issues, are we in the ballpark in that respect, you think, or?
I missed the question, I apologize.
Well, if cities like Casper, we have pretty heavy-duty freeze-thaw cycles.
Yeah.
And we know it's hard on streets. But we have a national average of 60 to 65, and yet the national average is probably a little warmer than we might be. Is that a fair statement, or?
You're right in that it's certainly colder here, but I wouldn't say that there's a direct correlation between temperature and funding. So it really is a national, including Canadian provinces as well.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Councilman Hewer.
We have multiple freeze-thaw cycles during the wintertime. Do you find that that's pretty normal for you know, cities in colder areas, or do we freeze and thaw more, or did you look at that? Did you
It wasn't a
consider-
component. We do look at the fact that there is freeze-thaw, but not cycles or frequency.
Yeah, 'cause I've looked at some places that I don't think freeze and thaw as much as we do. I think they just freeze, stay frozen, and then they thaw out and stay thawed out.
Right.
And so, but you didn't.
From my
look
lay
at that.
perspective, I'm sure that adds to the deterioration, certainly.
Yeah,
Making
but
it a
there,
more of a challenge.
you didn't have any way of
It wasn't.
studying that, or?
No, it wasn't
Okay.
factored in.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With respect to that deterioration graph that you showed kind of towards the beginning, you were identifying a sweet spot, if you will, of dealing with maintenance to avoid some of the more expensive treatments that are going to be needed, and perhaps maybe even prolonging that need for the life cycle of that street.
Sure.
Can you tell us again what that sweet spot is? And secondly, how does that compare to typically to state highway kinds of networks?
Let's get back to there. I don't know that I can speak specifically for state highway network, that portion. Sorry for that. There, I guess, would be. So again, how it compares, or I missed the question.
How do you know, local street networks compare to state highways as it relates to these this type of analysis?
Because of the loading, because of the traffic, they'll deteriorate more quickly.
And typical
those
design.
curves that we
Yeah.
assigned it were just that, a steeper curve because of their deterioration.
Okay.
Definitely factored in.
Okay, so the sweet spot here, tell us again, is what?
Roughly a PCI between 70 and 85, where we're able to do lightweight treatments, less expensive than an overlay. Whatever the suite is for your particular network, that would be the recommended approach. So the less expensive treatments more frequently, as opposed to deferring over the course of time and having them fall into the overlay category, if you will.
Okay, so if in the life cycle of a particular street, we'll just say it's an arterial kind of a street,
Yep.
at what point then do you recommend those treatments ought to take place in order to get the most life out of that?
I'd have to look at the
surface?
actual results, but for discussion point, you know, if it's in that 70, 73 PCI, that's quite probable where the recommended time to tackle those are. But there's a lot of other factors. It's not just one PCI. Its strength of pavement may allow us to let that slide a couple years. If it's weak, we might want to grab it when it's a couple points higher, just because it's moving more quickly on that curve. But all that is factored into the analysis.
Councilman Powell.
Thanks, Kristen. So you mentioned, sir, that we don't want to spend all of our money in reconstruction with 13%. Is there some matrix you use to try to figure out, well, devote this much to the worst of the lot, this much to prevent those decent streets from moving into the problematic areas, and then this much to maintain the high-quality streets that we have? Is there some, and I assume we can discuss that with Andrew at some point, is how to portion that 7.5 if we were able to come up with that?
There is a way to optimize that based on funds available, so it's kind of a moving target depending on what the needs are, but that first grab is the thick overlays before they become that partial reconstruct because of the dollar jump from the cost here to the cost there. But there's only so much to go around. And there's also that need to grab the partial reconstructs before they become reconstructs. But again, with a limited budget, we can only do so much. From there, we actually jump to the other side of the spectrum and take care of those very roads that we were just talking about, making sure that the good roads remain good, and then we filter across from there. But it is classic pavement management approach. It was applied to this project, and based on level of spending are the real criteria in terms of how we assign and pick the winners and losers, if you will. But it's never based on PCI alone or the worst first by any means.
So follow up if I may. So then if we assigned a budget amount and said, well, this is as much as we can afford, there's a formula you could use to say, well, then in that case, here's how much we'd recommend that you devote to these different problems.
Absolutely. And there's some flexibility in the program. Some agencies like to dedicate a certain percentage or certain dollar amounts to those lightweight treatments to make sure that everything's not being gobbled up, if you will, in the heavy stuff. So there's flexibility in that regard. I don't recall our specifics, but that was a part of the discussion and can be a part of the planning moving forward as well. Yes. Thank you.
Councilman Cappy.
In all of your analysis and everything, did you wind up making any recommendations as far as types of treatments based on categories? Because I noticed you had thrown up, you know, chip seal, overlay, slurry seal, whatever. But are there certain ones of those processes that you have found that actually work better based on climate and condition of roadway?
We're getting into the weeds, and I might defer to Andrew on that one, but it was a part of the discussion with the engineering team, yes.
Okay.
I don't remember the specifics. I don't know if you want to field that or not, but I'll
Mayor,
defer.
Council, certainly we gave IMS our typical rehab strategies that we currently use in this community. Be it a chip seal or slurry seal, or we're now looking at cape seals, you know, even as routine as crack sealing, what those might cost, all the way to a thin overlay, then to what we call a mill and fill. We're actually milling off some asphalt and putting new asphalt back in. So we gave him our typical rehab strategies that we use, which really are not drastically different than any community would utilize to maintain a roadway. So.
Councilman Hopkins.
This may be more for staff, but it looks to me like we just finished doing our 5-year long-range transportation plan. This would have been good data to have before we actually got too far into that. So would the plan be that we'd come back to this like 4 years from now and have this data in our hands for the city to help out with our long-range plan?
Council, Mayor, Council, the long-range transportation plan is really looking at where new roadways need to go and to serve the community, not necessarily based off the condition of our existing roadways. So there's a little bit of a disconnect between the long-range transportation plan and the payment management plan as to which roads we need to look at. You know, the long-range transportation plan is really looking at where do you need new roads for growth and projected growth and that kind of stuff. It doesn't really correlate to roadway condition.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna say, good report.
Yeah.
We got some good data.
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll move to the NCSD petition to vacate 8th Street between David and Center and the transportation cutouts alongside those.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The this, as you can tell, is sort of a two-step question, if you will. One of which is with regard to vacation. Of course, the other is an idea as it relates to neighborhood design and that sort of thing, development design guidelines. As you can see here on the screen, we have in presentation form the idea as it relates to what's being requested for vacation. And this is in between South Center and South David along the 8th Street corridor there. We could have the district kind of report to you what is behind the aspect of this request. And as you know, vacation means it no longer becomes a public thoroughfare and more relegated to the use of the new property owner, which in this case would be the school district. And so not something that the council gets a lot of, but something that may very well be helpful to the operation of the school district, and they can address that here tonight. And so with that, Madam Mayor, if I could turn the time over to Mr. Beamer and the school district for these two items, that'd be great.
Madam Mayor, Pro Tem Council, I'm not sure I have a lot to add to Carter's discussion. Even though you see a lot of platted lots here, this is actually where Park Elementary sits right now. This is 9th Street, Center Street, Davis Street. Their bus hub school is actually cut out into this lot here, just so you know exactly where we're kind of talking about right now. This alley is actually still platted. Park School is built over this platted alley. So we're looking to get that vacated at the same time, or maybe that will follow this vacation. But the school district is looking to vacate 8th Street between David and Center. We did something very similar adjacent Dean Morgan several years ago, and I forget what street that was. Was it Spruce Street between 14th and 15th, I believe? The city vacated that stretch of roadway again to serve the school district and their bus activities and their athletic activities, I think, at the same time. But Doug Tennyson with the school district is here to provide any additional information or to answer any questions council might have. But it is really a request from the school district.
Councilman Hopkins?
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. I assume we're still gonna have to maintain a water line, sewer line in that, or do we need to? We can abandon it? Or?
Keep in mind, well, this is a somewhat a unique stretch of roadway, and that there is no water line in 8th Street.
Oh.
So there's nothing to maintain there. We do have a sewer line that comes through here and goes east and ties into a manhole here, but the only facility it serves is Park Elementary. So one of the conditions that I've suggested is that if you're going to vacate this sewer main now essentially becomes a service line to serve Park Elementary, and it is now the school district's to own and maintain all the way to its termination point at this manhole where it joins the rest of our network.
Thank you.
Councilman Huber?
Well, I think it probably pretty much makes sense to vacate this, I don't know. But something that I'm curious about, at that north portion of ground there used to belong to the city. Does anybody know how and when that went to the school?
Well, you probably please.
I'm just curious about that.
Years ago, that was when the school district was looking at building schools. The thought was that everybody got their heads together and said, you know, if the city owned that piece of property, which belonged to the Warren, or the
Terry.
Yeah. Anyway, it belonged to the family, and there was a rider on it that as long as it was used for a city use, it would remain the city's. So Judge Skavdal went out to California and met with the family, and they agreed that we would allow the school district to have that piece of property. So it was, in fact, the agreement went away with the city, and it became the school district property.
Councilman Bates?
I guess my only concern about, or I guess I'm wondering, what is it gonna be, cause I know at De Morgan, it's for the buses. But I know a lot of parents drop off their student or their kids right in that section, and the rest of the way around it, you're kinda limited on where parents can drop off their kids. So is there any, I mean, what's the exact plan, for that, blocking that completely off? Will parents still be able to use it? Or are we gonna have backup traffic on Center and David and 9th?
Mayor Pro Tem Council, I'll try and answer this question, but I may turn it over to Doug. I know they're planning on developing teacher parking on this vacated portion of 8th Street, which will then in turn open up more parking on the existing David Street parking that they have there. And they're also looking at creating diagonal parking on David Street to increase the additional parking. So with the additional parent parking, teacher parking, and then full disclosure, my wife's a teacher at this school. I don't, but I'm not promoting it either way. It will open up more additional parking for student drop-off. Now, Doug, please correct me if I said anything incorrectly.
That's exactly right. We're planning to get some staff parking there.
Okay.
And of course, it'll continue to be used for the buses and bus help. And we're also considering someplace to create a parent drop-off. That's one possibility.
Alright, Councilman Huber.
Well, and I would just further point out here that if you look at 8th Street there, it really doesn't go very far, because, you know, a block to the west, it kind of dead ends into the NCHS complex. If you go about 3 or 4 blocks to the east, it kind of dead ends into, I forget what the street is there, where it gets into the jogging streets there. And so it's not a street that provides any real arterial function or anything like that. I'd have a different feeling if it, you know, if it really had any arterial function, but doesn't go to or from much of anything.
City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Doug, would the school district have any concern with respect to a time frame by which that parking would be designed and created along that corridor pursuant to a vacation being honored by the council? So that indeed we don't perpetuate or create a worse problem with regard to parent traffic and that sort of thing?
The plan is for the renovation that's ongoing currently. That extra parking is part of that renovation, so I would expect that all to be completed within the next year and a half.
Okay, so if the council were to agree with this, and obviously the council hasn't decided one way or the other, would the school district then agree to that time frame as a condition of this vacation happening?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Councilman Bates.
Putting you on the spot, and what is the staff's recommendation on this?
Madam Mayor, Councilman, I think that it could be probably as useful to the district and inconsequential to the community in a way that is similar to the vacation that council honored over on Spruce near Dean Morgan, from my perspective. Andrew, do you disagree with that, or?
This has got very low traffic volumes on it now, even with the school there, and in fact, we really don't even count the traffic because it's relatively low. So I get concerned about traffic circulation and if ever we're gonna move the traffic, how's traffic gonna get around? But it is so light, from a traffic standpoint, it doesn't raise any red flags necessarily.
Councilman Captain.
How is the traffic on both Center and David right now?
How is traffic going on Center and David?
I mean, is there quite a bit of traffic on Center and David in that area?
Certainly Center has a lot more traffic than David. Now, I avoid all schools around 7:30 to 8:30 a.m. and between like 3 to 3:45 p.m. only because of all the kiddos getting picked up. But Center Street is classified as a collector street. Davis Street is what I would consider to be a relatively low volume residential type of corridor.
Councilman Powell?
So with the Spruce Street, the primary motivation was basically safety. We didn't want kids running across the street to an athletic field with cars potentially driving. Is that sort of what we're looking at here, to create a safe place for, because there's a lot of kids down there during the transfer periods, right? So
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem, Council, certainly this is their main bus hub right now is this facility just to the north of Park. And there is a lot of kids milling around, getting to and from buses and transferring. So certainly there is a safety component to it.
is that the primary reason for asking for this?
Mayor Pro Tem, Council, I will defer to the school district for that answer.
I think safety is a big portion of it. Certainly we're looking at being able to get kids into the school from either buses or parents dropping them off. We're also looking for some additional parking because parking is pretty constrained at this school.
Councilman Hopkins?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to proceed with this. I think it just makes sense. Another thing, going back to how we acquired this many, many years ago, or how the school district acquired it, the reason they didn't want to rebuild Park School is because that plot of ground that Park School's on, that block, was not big enough to meet the requirements for the state of Wyoming to put a grade school on. They wanted, as I recall, 4.3 acres or 4.5 acres, and that just had half of it. So it still gives the school district the potential to rebuild an entire new facility someday when we reach a point we need one. And without them owning both properties with nothing between them, without 8th Street, they'd never be able to do that.
I agree. Ready?
All abstain.
Yeah, no, I'm a parent of almost two children at Park, so I'll keep out of this one. Okay.
Where do you drop your kids off?
So,
On 8th Street?
All opinions aside, I'll just state facts. So we drop off on 8th Street. So the way that the school has asked all parents, and this is reiterated to parents pretty often in emails, is that you enter from either south or north on David and come to 8th Street, hugging the side, so facing east basically. They would prefer that you don't drop off on the west side. That's kind of the bus hub side. So they prefer that you come from, west to east.
West to east.
Yep, coming on 8th Street. And so currently, right now, there's construction obviously happening on the left side of those blocks. And so the drop off is actually very close to Center Street, like where the kids can enter the playground. It's basically on Center Street at this point. Yeah, it's very close to that corner. So, I mean, obviously, the only thing with dropping off on David Street is the majority of that's going to be a building, and so I'm assuming the kids will just enter at the end of the building and then go around to the playground.
Beth,
Yeah, absolutely.
along the lines of your comment about when this might all happen, is right now the main focus on drop-off is on 8th Street. The school district has mentioned they are reconstructing it, but if we turn around now and close 8th Street, the drop-offs that they're talking about constructing may not happen for 18 months. So that puts us through almost 2 school years. I would like to see the caveat is that basically we don't block that off until the new pieces are put in, and that needs to be moved up into the priority to where then they have a safe space to be dropped off without screwing up the traffic on either Center or David, and then go ahead and close it. But I think that should be a caveat that we should put in there.
Well, I appreciate Councilman Cathy's concern there, but if we vacate that, then all of those safety factors rest on the school district and providing for a place for people to drop those off. All that rests on them. So I don't see that, and presumably they're gonna act in a safe and good faith manner there and not just say, well, turn your kids loose in the middle of the street or something. But, and so I don't see where that's really our concern.
I would hope that is the case, but
Well,
you
yeah.
and Councilman Bates and Councilman Hopkins will get the phone calls from the angry parents before they go to the school district.
Well, that's what I was gonna say is, it is our problem because it's the citizens of Casper that's dropping their kids off, and we're causing problems for our citizens.
At that point, we wouldn't be, the school district would be. And maybe I'm naive, but I have confidence that they're not gonna do something that's bizarre.
I'm just mainly
Yeah.
concerned about the time frame.
Mhm.
Just a point of reference, the expansion that's happening right now, the work at the school is phased. We're adding 4 classrooms on the north. That will be complete by fall of this year. And at that point, there will be no other construction really occurring around the site until the following summer of '21, when we continue major maintenance inside the building. So that would, even if the street's vacated, that still keeps 8th Street open at this time to be able to utilize for drop-off. Because the summer of '21 is when we'll make the parking lot changes and make those modifications on the west side to address the new entry, and then would also be able to address 8th Street. So should be able to alleviate the issues coming fall of '20 for school for the year, and then we'll take care of the construction during the summer when there aren't students in the summer of '21.
And just for anyone who's not familiar, park is actually unique, and you kind of alluded to the fact that parking is beyond difficult. So obviously on Center Street, there's a handful of spots along the side there, but on David Street, there's maybe 4 street spots, but the rest, like you said, is for teacher parking that's up against the building. And on 9th Street, there actually is no parking. And so it's very limited, and I can tell you, being a parent who's had to utilize the handicap spots are almost always full of cars that are not there for handicap parking because of the lack of parking. So it's unique. Any other, go ahead, Councilman Powell.
Just a comment. I don't think either one of you have to abstain when we get to the formal vote.
Oh, no, I was just trying not to put in like parent comments versus councilwoman comments.
So, I mean, it looks like there's plenty of support for it anyway,
Yep.
but unless I'm wrong about that, Mr. Henley, as an employee of the school district, Councilman Bates is not required to.
Yeah, I think, okay, it would affect the general population as much as you, so that's kind of the rule of thumb test.
Okay.
No financial benefit to anyone, so.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, so, sorry, just since we've had more discussion, can we do another thumbs up round? Okay.
Okay, Madam Mayor and members of the council, we'll prepare the minute action for this to happen at a subsequent business meeting to make all this take place.
Okay. All right.
Very good, thank you.
Sorry, and part of that whole discussion, we also have transportation cutouts, so now we could break into that discussion.
Mayor, Council, I'm Steve Gavin, the Director of Transportation. Do I have, how much time do I have so I can just make sure that you guys stay?
30 seconds.
We run like that, so. Back in 2012, I took over transportation, and Superintendent Hopkins said, you know, I have this vision about, you know, kind of this hub and spoke situation, which we're actually talking about right here, which was the hub system. Previous to that, we had, you know, within our transportation, about 75 buses running around, picking up kids, dropping them off at certain schools. We had monitors at those schools, and we'd run our routes to about 6 o'clock at night. So we, you know, so we worked diligently on this. They said it couldn't happen. You know, you can't get 1,000 kids to pay attention to switch one bus to another. Okay. Elementary, we transfer about 1,000 students there within about a 7-minute period. Okay. 800 to 1,000 middle level, and then about 500 high school students. Okay, the first year we utilized NC as kind of the hub. We bring kids over from Kelly Walsh. So we're always looking at making things more efficient, better. And my goal is to, you know, right now the kids stay at the school for about 15, 20, 25 minutes at the elementary. We pick them up, bring them to the hub. We're going to get better at that coordination. I'd like that hub to be out of there, done at 4 o'clock. So that's a big challenge. In doing so, we have to evaluate all our routes. We want to try to keep as many stops as we can on school district property. Okay, you've heard about neighborhood schools, and so we have school of choice, but our routing is very similar still to neighborhood schools. We have kids go to the neighborhoods, schools, and then we transport them to the hub, transfer them, and then back to their schools. Okay. Majority of our elementary schools buses have monitors on them, so we have 2 adults in there. So we've increased that cost. That's important to us. We have 2 campus supervisors at the hub. So we continuously to look for improvements, to see how can we do things better. And even with the inclement weather, we work diligently with, starting days before a big storm comes in with the City of Casper Streets Department. You know, what are you seeing? This is what we're seeing. We're preparing to alter our routes if needed. We've evaluated our routes this year, and we've really found out the more that we're in the subdivisions, the more we are getting stuck. Makes sense, right? We can stay on those priority routes, you know, and the street crews do great. They hit the priorities, and then early in the morning, 4 o'clock, they start hitting our schools, doing a great job. So we know we can get from main streets to our schools. That's where we need to really focus our bus stops at. If they're not at a main school, how close can we be to a priority route? Okay, it's the safety of all. Okay, again, it is the parents' main responsibility to get the kids to school or not. We can run that shuttle bus, very similar to what the city does. We're picking up just as precious cargo as the city is. Okay, so I'm here actually today is to kind of explain, you know, what we did with the hub. We decreased 622 stops just by going to the hub. But we don't have buses following buses. In the morning we had 25 buses going to D. Morgan. Now we have 5. 17 to Pineview. Now we have 1. So that's how we change things. Try to efficiency. So one of the other things is that, you know, we started looking at routes, and I'm going to pass these around real quick, and I know I'm going fast because your time is valuable. This is just a stop that we have over on Donegal, and over on Donegal by the mall. We really, it's not a bad stop. It's right there by the community health center. But we stop right on Donegal. What do you think that does? We need traffic. When we're looking at traffic flows, when we're stopping on the main streets, it completely stops it. Where's the main arteries that are plowed? It's, you know, 2nd Street, 12th Street. It's those main arteries. So we're looking at how can we do business better? How can we be safer? So do we need another one? So there we go. So this is, huh?
No one pays attention to me anyway.
I think they do. So we're just kind of looking, and I guess as the city grows, we're really looking at the walkways, and, you know, students being able to get to a bus stop or to a school utilizing the walkways. I mean, that has been so valuable to our transportation system, and actually cutting down miles. Okay, since the hub, as you've seen in your minutes, you know, we've cut down 300,000 miles a year. Overall, by looking at just in operations, we've cut 600,000 miles down. All the other districts are growing. They're putting more and more miles. We're saying, how can we do things efficiently? So we continue to evaluate, and I would ask for your cooperation and collaboration as these new developments are you know, going all around the city. As you know, as the city bus is growing, is there a way that we can have student transportation, community transportation? Is there, you know, the pullouts? It's very similar to the one on Center Street. There's a divided concrete. When that divided concrete is there, we can run our reds, or we don't. You know, we can get the school board to say we don't need to run our reds there. The traffic can continue to move. We plan our stops on main routes, main arteries, and we throw those reds up, everybody has to stop. So we're thinking, well, when it snows really deep, we go around the block Now we're getting stuck. Now the delay happens. We can keep from delays. The kids aren't standing out in the cold. Today was a pretty cold day. We want to stay on time, and we're continuing to look at our service. Hopefully by next year, parents will be able to tell when that bus, how far that bus is out by an app on their phone. When is that bus going to get there? So we continue to grow, to improve. You know, if there's some way, and I know there's always a cost, financial cost to doing those things, but if there's, you know, as we're considering those things, moving forward, if that can be in the back of your head, would this make a good place for the bus stop and a student transportation? You know, maybe we can have a conversation about that and see if it's a place that we'd be able to use. Talk fast, quick. I appreciate your time greatly. So.
Any questions, comments?
Thank you.
Well, that's done a good
Councilman
job.
Bates?
Yes.
As far as a comment, I reached out to the city director for transportation and asked him about what his thoughts were regarding the cutouts. And he brought up that the new development by Mills on Poison Spider and near Robertson Road there, there's an apartment complex going in, I guess, but they're gonna do a big old cutout for the city buses. Primary, the idea was for the city buses, but then the school district can use it. And he said that's gonna be such a huge benefit to the city. They're in Mills. So, he said for, the city to do the cutouts would be, beneficial for the city buses as well. That's what he mentioned to me when I asked him about what his thoughts were.
Did you ask Ken, was it the developer's choice to do that, or did the city of Mills ask them to do that? Town of Mills asked them to do that?
That I didn't ask him that. He just mentioned that he thought it was a great idea and that's what they're doing there. So I don't have an answer, I'm sorry.
I think we've got an answer.
I can answer that question. Sean Gustafson with BCS Engineers, we're designing that cutout for Cornerstone Development. And in cooperation with the town of Mills, they're doing a little bit of a land swap. They helped Cornerstone out, and they're giving some of their land to the town of Mills for this turnout and footing the bill for that turnout. They feel it's a good thing for their apartment complex.
Okay. Councilman Cappy?
Roughly what is one of those, excuse me, roughly what does one of those turnouts cost?
If you'd asked me tomorrow, I'd have a cost estimate. It's in the neighborhood of $12,000, but it's going along with the widening of Natrona Avenue. So if you're what I'm trying to say there is, if you're gonna start fresh and put one, say, by Hilltop or something like that, it's gonna be more expensive, probably closer to $30,000.
Okay.
Doug, do you remember how much ours cost on Center Street?
That was about $100,000.
I believe it was.
That's a really big one.
Yeah. So, well, I greatly appreciate your time. Mayor, Council, thank you.
Thank you.
Does the city need any direction from the council on this item, Carter?
Madam Mayor, Council, I think this was really for your information, and as we get into some of the other transportation planning initiatives and so forth, design guidelines and those kinds of things, this sort of an idea would be really at home with respect to that theater conversation. So unless council has other direction, otherwise I think this is for your information.
Councilman Cappy?
I had one comment along some of those lines, is that I have been an advocate of the pullouts for even the bus. Because if you're driving down 2nd Street and they stop in front of Hilltop, then that blocks one lane of traffic during rush hours and things. So I'm an advocate of pullouts for not only the school district, but for our own bus system. However, I think we need to be very diligent because the gentleman just made the statement that we need to start spending $7.5 million a year just to maintain the streets we have. And now if you're looking at someplace between $30,000 and $100,000 per cutout, and I see, how many on here? We really need to start looking hard at how we spend our money on amenities and streets and everything else, because the oil and gas and the coal industries are not doing well, and outlook for the near future is not good for either one of those.
Councilman Powell?
Thank you. Well, don't we have an issue with the right of way too? I mean, we don't own the property where these cutouts would be put in, right? This would be private property in most cases, which would be significant negotiations.
Well, unless they happen to be already within the existing right of way.
Yeah, well.
Because I don't know how far right of ways extend out past the
Well,
existing
I
streets.
guess that's a question, I don't know.
Yeah. But
But
good
then,
point.
but then you'd have to move the sidewalk around as well, so.
Right.
Councilman Hebert?
I don't think anybody's gonna say that these cutouts would not be a good idea, but there are the concerns that Councilman Powell and Kathy have just raised. But what I'm curious about is, and I guess I'm looking at Andrew about this, if there's a way that we could sit there and say that, okay, when we look at repaving, redoing Second Street, that then might be the time to look at putting a cutout in somewhere along there. But I also worry that about as quick as we install one of these things somewhere, the bus system and or the school district's gonna decide, well, we don't wanna stop there. We wanna stop somewhere else. And so I worry about that, coordinating those things. But what I would like to see is that this be placed as some sort of a footnote or a flag that would pop up on, well, okay, if we're gonna redo CY, let's see if we should put one of these in somewhere or something. That would seem to me to be the time to be doing this instead of just going out and tearing things up and doing it.
I'm not sure if there was a question there, but any comments?
Go ahead.
Mayor Pro Tem, Councilman, it really comes back to Councilman Kathy's and Councilman Powell's earlier comment about right of way. Generally, our right of way is from back of sidewalk to back of sidewalk. I mean, we might have a foot on either side, but that is generally, our right of way limits is from back of sidewalk to back of sidewalk. You can look down Davis Street, you can look down Center Street, you can look down 8th Street and 9th Street. If you're on the back of the sidewalk, you're essentially on the right of way line. So for us to create a cutout in an existing neighborhood becomes very problematic in acquiring those, either an easement or that additional right of way for us to fit one in. It's easier for us to do on a new development when we allocate that right of way ahead of time in a new plat or new subdivision. But trying to get these infill cutouts is very problematic. We've had problems even installing bus stops, just the shelters, because we simply don't have the right of way for that, let alone trying to install a turnout for buses, either a school bus or a taxi bus or the bus.
Go ahead, Councilman.
The one thing too, which goes along and alludes to Councilman Huber's comments, I don't know how many of you caught it in the paper, and I don't know where it's wound up going, but the legislature was starting to talk about taking away state funding for bus transportation from the school districts. And if the school districts were to lose that state funding, would that then change the whole school bus system, which goes right back to your comment then, is do we then go back to neighborhood schools and eliminate almost all busing? But, I don't know where that may wind up going either. But that was something that caught my eye in the newspaper.
Following it well.
Yeah,
So I don't
you lose employment if that happens. No, not really.
It's just going back to the state funding that we had last year. And so, and what we've done is tighten up our belts just like everybody else with activity, travel guidelines and stuff like that. So, I don't see, you know, the school of choice, it really only affects the junior high students, right? Because the elementary students, the junior high and high school students still meet a huge requirement for transportation. So the neighborhood schools, and that's why we have them go to the neighborhood schools, because we meet that recommendation of transporting them out. I wouldn't see a big change in our operations, and our stops have pretty much been there, you know, since 2012, or actually 2014. I wouldn't see a lot of them change. I just wanted to bring up this, and I understand right-of-ways and stuff like that, and it would have to be a collaboration with the city to say, yes, we would, if we have an established bus stop there, because we have distances around schools, and that's why you don't see stops really close to schools. Distances around schools that are required by state guidelines for funding, so we follow those. So it's just a collaboration as we grow and stuff like that. So something in the back of your mind. You've done a great job working with the walking paths and stuff like that. Is there something else that we can collaborate on?
Thank you.
Anything else on this item? Okay, move on to the budget amendment number 2.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. We received a memo from Mr. Pitlick as it relates to the preparation of the amendment to help us calibrate our current budget with the outcomes that we didn't expect or anticipate back in May of last year when we originally designed the budget and so on. You will note that this budget amendment looks like a pretty big number, and that in and of itself, you know, in the neighborhood of 14 million or so, can be a little concerning if in fact you weren't aware of all the details that are engaged with why that number is where it's at. Some of this is not going to be a surprise to you at all, and as you know, with regard to some of the directives we've been given and projects that we've talked to you about and so on, we really can't move forward until that authority is in place, and so much of this amendment creates that spending authority as well as acknowledges a number of other things that have transpired with respect to grants and other revenues we didn't expect, and of course expenses either. A couple things that I want to point out to your attention, and then of course I'll turn the time over to Mr. Pitlick if it pleases the council, is with regard to probably our largest projects, and that's in line with the City Hall project, which, as you remember, is going to be in the neighborhood of $3 million. You will see here as you look at your spreadsheets that indeed, much like the direction you gave us, we are suggesting that that project be funded out of the what's been commonly referred to as the revolving land fund as well as the LAD fund. And as you know, we hope to backfill both those funds, one of which would include the transaction of public land into private hands, or public facilities into private hands, and we've got a few of those that we're looking at. Another big one is with respect to the ice plant at the ice arena. That is a big project too, demands a lot of resources, and as you recall, that's coming out of the perpetual care fund, or at least a balance of that project that hasn't been funded is coming out of the perpetual care project fund, rather. The other aspect of funding that we are hoping to get your approval for, by way of the amendment anyway, is to acknowledge the Midwest project and the award of the Business Council grant that we received earlier in the year. That obviously allows us to move forward with respect to the planning and beginning phases of the second phase of that project. Another piece that I want to draw your attention to, although it is very, very insignificant compared to some of these numbers that we're talking about, but one of the things that we haven't necessarily nailed down direction on, and that's with respect to CNFR. you'll recall about a year ago, actually, around this time last year, we had a presentation by Visit Casper wherein they wanted to make a proposal with some funding from council to try to get more tickets sold to CNFR. That was about a $10,000 ask. You may not be aware, but indeed we were actually never billed for that piece of funding, primarily because that idea didn't work out as well as was anticipated, or at least along the lines of what it was that you were told would happen. This year, however, they'd like to get that same tranche of funding put back into action as it relates to the same goal, trying to get more tickets to the event this year, but also with respect to some funding that we would like to divert towards support of their Parade of Champions this year. This is a new aspect of the CNFR event, wherein we hope to, of course, engage some excitement for the event and get some tickets sold and attendance put in place. The Parade of Champions would include parading the participants down the 2nd Street corridor of our community and culminating in a meet and greet event at the David Street Station. So that would require not only the $10,000 but an additional $1,600, which you would see on the first page of your spreadsheet if you happen to notice that. Those are some real brief themes of what you see in your spreadsheet. If it's okay with the council, if I could turn some time over to Tom to walk us through some of the other major elements, that'd be great.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Carter did hit on the major components of the budget amendment. Just to touch on a couple more, you'll notice in the general fund there was some use of funds there, and more than half of that was for some vehicles for the SRO officers. You may recall in the agreement with the school district, they do provide funding for salaries, but they also provide an annual allocation for equipment, which includes some vehicles. So during the budget process, that revenue was all budgeted, but at that time, it wasn't budgeted for the vehicles. So there is a revenue source for that, even though that's in here. And we also did, there was just under $300,000 that was available last year in the budget for study for the police facility that was not used. And this also carries that forward to make it available for use this year to continue on with that project. But otherwise, again, I think Carter did a pretty thorough job with the major projects. The schedule for this would be to bring this forward at your meeting next week for formal adoption. And with that, if you have any further questions, I'd be happy to try to answer it.
I did have one question.
Sorry, Councilman Happy.
The unanticipated overtime at the bail field. Do you know what created that?
Do you want to address that, Tom? We could certainly have Andrew tackle that one too. That's okay with me.
Either way.
Andrew, why don't you do it? You're excited about it over there.
Carter?
You'll have the answer for me tomorrow?
No, yeah, 'cause I won't be here tomorrow. No, we had some special waste at disposal. You may have heard recently about wind turbines and that disposal cost, but that has created some overtime needs for us to do that. So there is an offsetting revenue that we've been bringing in, but that is the real justification for that. A lot of that overtime cost in the solid waste.
Some of that included, Madam Mayor, if I could as well, included some of the special circumstances relating to the rebuild of the bail fill as well. That incurred some overtime because we had to do extra dumps with respect to the roll-off containers and so on. Is that not right too?
Mayor Pro Tem, City Manager, yeah, that is correct. The Baylor project also
for instance, extenuating circumstances where we did have to go, make more trips after the landfill phase, so.
The point that I think I'd like council to be aware of is we do not anticipate that that would be an ongoing overtime need. We think that that'll be a fairly unique circumstance to this budget year that we didn't anticipate as well when we built the budget a year or so ago.
So you're kind of figuring that we'll be able to take care of the turbine blades during normal working hours, and then obviously the construction is done.
Right.
So.
Yep.
Yep, absolutely.
Councilor Powell.
Thank you. I think you touched on this, Carter, but I just think it's important for anyone listening to understand that these are decisions that have already been made and voted on, and all we're trying to do is make sure that the budget reflects these changes.
Correct.
So that these aren't decisions we're making tonight to spend this money. They've all been made prior, and it's just important that the budget lines up with those changes and expenditures. And maybe that's clear to everybody, but I just thought I'd make sure that that's explained.
Madam Mayor, if I could tag on to Councilman Powell's point, he's exactly right. And furthermore, I would tell you, we aren't asking for money that would be over and above, in the general fund in particular, what we've been directed to spend. So in other words, if we do have sales taxes that are in surplus, we're not asking you to spend those dollars. We certainly will probably have recommendations coming forward during the budget year preparation, which is, you know, only a couple months away at this point in time. But we're not asking you to give us those dollars right now.
Any other questions or comments?
I'd like to thank Councilman Powell for bringing up that point.
Yeah.
That yes, this is already spent, and some of this money actually, even like my comment about the bail-fill overtime, is part of the enterprise fund, so it's not actually coming out of the general fund either. So there are some of those things in there with the public works enterprise funds.
All right, good to go ahead and move forward and put this on the official agenda?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, C4 text amendment. Bless you.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, oh, this is the fun part, guys. Y'all know what we do. Okay, all right. This is probably as quick an item as we would need, and we've been given 30 minutes to go over this. I honestly don't believe we're gonna make up a lot of time at this point. You'll recall Mayor Friel addressing this very, very briefly a couple weeks ago, excuse me, wherein we have a piece of language in the zoning classification relating to C4 that suggests that gambling facilities need to be located a certain radius away from religious facilities. If council will recall, at least for some of those who have been on the council now for a couple of iterations, we went through this exact same discussion with the old Godfather's facility there on 2nd Street and the church that's located nearby. Council was willing to make an adjustment, if you will, in those zoning classifications so that we wouldn't have that rub again. We're asking the same thing for a C4 designation that you're willing to accommodate in a C2 designation. We feel more comfortable with a C4 designation, however, because by design, a C4 is meant to be a little more broad and liberal, if you will, in its application than even a C2. So from our standpoint, as it relates to the particular application that we've got with a potential developer up there at the sidelines building or the elevations building, I don't think that it creates any more difficulty than what you experienced at the old Godfather's building on 2nd Street. And so our recommendation would be to adopt the draft that we submitted to you on the floor And of course, that's a 3 reading process, as you well know, in very similar fashion to what you did with C2, which again, by design, is meant to be a stricter commercial classification.
I'm good.
All
Save
right.
28 minutes, sir.
We'll move it to
Nice
the
work.
official
Thank you.
decision.
Thanks for helping us with that. I appreciate that. Thank you. We'll get it prepared for formal adoption and go from there.
That location is actually the old McDonald's.
Is that right?
What?
Yeah.
How about that?
The one over there on the Second Street,
On
not,
Second.
not sidelines.
Yeah, not
Oh,
sidelines,
right.
no, not sidelines. But that was McDonald's.
That's
Then Godfather's moved in for a little while.
They were much later, I suppose.
Much later,
Yeah.
yeah. I was very confused about what location.
I remember it as Godfather. I don't know if you'll remember. Yeah.
But I'm easily confused.
Still love you, Mike.
All right, on that note, agenda review. All right, does anybody have any items coming up at next week's meeting for March 3rd that they would like to ask a question about now? I'm gonna take that as a no. And it looks like it's fully set, but just to run through them. Any questions on the next work session on March 10th? That one's definitely full, but this one's right here.
Madam Mayor,
Yep.
if I could make a point about the 10th. We do have an item that we want to bring to your attention as it relates to a position that we would like your support for. Without getting too much into the weeds of that detail right now, it would help if we could add that into the discussion on the 10th and bring your attention to that at that point and hopefully entertain some questions for you. And of course, by then we'll have a memo in front of you and everything else. That's okay.
Sounds good?
I'm okay with it.
And I do have a question about one of the items on the 10th.
Okay.
The property maintenance code revisions, roughly what is that going to be about?
Councilman Kathy, Madam Mayor, Pro Tem, this is in response to the request of a couple councils ago to bring back for your consideration in a work session format an abridged, reduced, sort of bite-sized discussion as it relates, in our minds, to unsafe structures. And so the discussion that you will hear on the 10th is what we would propose for some of a solution for some of the limitations that we're facing right now in dealing with unsafe structures. And generally speaking, that is with respect to absentee landlords that aren't keeping their properties up for their tenants and so on. So that's really it.
As a follow-up?
Yep.
The reason I was asking that is I think most of us got a letter from Mr. Getz concerning snow removal on public areas, like around schools, along outer drives, say between, like, on the east side between 2nd and the interstate, where property owners are plowing their lots, but they're not plowing sidewalks and things like that. And so I didn't know, and he was requesting that maybe that be brought up as a way for, again, public safety. You have people now trying to walk some of those stretches out in the streets, and particularly along outer drive and around schools, with kids walking in the streets, with people walking, and those are normally 30 mile an hour, but they're along outer drive, that's a 40 mile an hour section. And I'm not proposing to drop it to 30 because then people will drive 10. But But that was something that I didn't know if that could be incorporated into this, or if that needed to be a separate item that we discussed at some time along the way.
Madam Mayor, Councilman Kathy, in my opinion, I think it would warrant a separate discussion in that I've had folks who have ADA concerns that find themselves walking in roads because sidewalks are more dangerous, oddly enough. And so if it pleases the council, I think I'd recommend that for a separate work session topic, and bring that discussion in full form apart from what we want to talk about on this side.
Not a problem, but that was
Okay.
why I asked. I was kind of leading question to lead
Sure.
into what we were really going to talk about. So if we can add that someplace into our deals to bring that up as a work session, I think some of the citizens would be in favor of that.
Well, and
Councilman
Madam
Ward.
Mayor, thank you. But, you know, the sidewalk business, I think is a lot bigger issue than what people think, because I know, you know, when I was walking around campaigning, you get into some of the older areas of town over by Dean Morgan, by NCHS and that stuff. Sidewalks in those areas are just in atrocious condition. They are horrible. It's just, I don't see how anybody could reasonably walk safely on what they're calling a sidewalk in a lot of those areas. And so I think at some point we do need to be talking about, you know, as part of property maintenance code, you know, what are we gonna be doing about, you know, are we gonna be going in and telling people you gotta put in a new sidewalk there, or what? Because there are, I mean, there's places where there'll be a 6 or 8 inch upheaval there that, you know, is just a horrendous trip hazard. And so at some point I think we do need to be talking about that. And if we
It
want
may
to do
turn
it as
into a
part
general
of
discussion
this
on sidewalk
property maintenance code or where it fits in, I don't know, but yeah, thank you for reminding me of that.
Not a problem.
Okay. March 17th has a whole total of 1 item. Does anybody have a question on that date?
No, but throw it on there.
Well, so that one's a regular council meeting.
Oh.
Yep.
Oh, never mind.
All right,
Sorry
and
about
so
that.
then the last one we would need to discuss would be March 24th. So does anybody, looks like that meeting maybe has a little bit of room. Does anybody have an item, or would be open to the proposal of adding Councilman Kathy's? I guess the first question would probably be, is that enough time for the city to prepare materials?
I think so.
Okay.
Is council willing to discuss it? Is the first question.
Well, yeah, so do we have five thumbs up to discuss sidewalk maintenance on March 24th? Okay.
Thank you, gentlemen. And lady.
Councilman Powell.
And let's just all be cognizant of the fact that these are very controversial matters, as we found out with the International Property Maintenance Code, which is really what led to this being on the agenda, is that we never really gave our staff an opportunity to explain why they thought this was important. And that was our fault, in my opinion, but there are a wide range of opinions about the extent to which the city should be interfering or overseeing how private property is maintained. So, and there's a legitimate arguments on both sides, and let's just be aware of the fact that this can get overheated.
Just to slightly get ahead of it, I have worked alongside the Contractors Licensing and Appeals Board, over broadly discussing this particular one that's going to be introduced. And this is definitely more narrowed down. This is not like a full-blown international code. This is very narrowed down to like health and safety items specific. Would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And so just to kind of put that out there in advance, I mean, obviously everyone will get to see a draft of it, but this is very specific, and I think it has maybe 9 items? I'm trying to remember the count. Roughly 9 items that are health and safety based alone. So just more condensed.
But follow-up, some of us may think it needs to be more extensive.
Could be.
So it isn't just a matter of, you know, saying this is what staff wants,
Yep.
so okay, because we aren't gonna revisit this again. or if council does revisit it, it will be, you know, far into the future. So this is, once it's on the agenda, we should have a full discussion of,
Yep.
of is it too small, is it too large, is it too prescriptive, does it miss some important items? So I think it's good that we set aside 45 minutes, and I'm guessing that probably won't be sufficient. We'll probably have to talk about it again after that.
Yep. Councilman Hopkins?
Thank you. I just read today about a situation that's going on in Pittsburgh. It's kind of a strange thing because they're having a bit of a housing boom. And they do have apparently a pretty strict property maintenance code. And they gave an example of one guy that had a contractor come in and want to offer to buy his house. And so you saw him inspect the house and the property. He turns around and turns the guy in to the property maintenance code, and then tries and lowballs the house price so he can buy it and flip it. So,
It's probably the International Property Maintenance Code. So the majority of cities use in the United States.
yeah.
It's ridiculous.
I just found out the other day, the city of Houston has no zoning, no property zoning. That was mind-boggling, city that size, no
Well,
zoning.
And that's what happens. The city of Houston is what happens when you don't have any restrictions.
Ouch. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and guess with that particular item being on, oh wait, that's back up on the 10th though, okay.
Yeah.
For the 24th, with the addition of sidewalk maintenance, are there any other items, or do people feel like we have space for another item?
I think that's good.
That's good.
Okay, perfect. All right, legislative review.
Madam Mayor, you have a contingent going to Cheyenne starting tomorrow for the winter session of the WAM convention. And we certainly plan to take advantage of that time to advocate on behalf of our wonderful community and some of the ideas that we think are in keeping with what council directed as a part of your legislative agenda a number of weeks ago. Just as sort of an update on a couple things, we have seen some traction with the surface water legislation. That is one of the committees that we plan to visit while we're there, and that would be the Revenue Committee on the House side. And you know, testify in support of that legislation. As you recall, it came out of Senate 28-2, which was very, very favorable. We also plan to visit with our legislature about the municipal option. It's being referred to as municipal option tax, but really what it is a revision of both the 5th, 6th, and 7th cent taxes, if you will. You'll recall that was a collaborative effort with the counties and the cities working together and putting together a proposal that they both support. So that is also anticipated to be in committee while we're there, and you know, that'll be on the Senate side in this case, however. The wind turbine legislation is, you know, an interesting discussion. I don't totally understand it, but we do plan to visit about that while we're there. One of the senators that is a sponsor is one of our own senators, and we'd like to visit with him about that and see where he's coming from in that regard. If you ever have questions about the turbine program that the city undertakes, now that Andrew's not here, I can talk all kinds of detail about it. I'm just kidding. That's not true. But nonetheless, we could certainly have a conversation about that too. It's very, very interesting how it's gotten so much traction over the last few, you know, months. And so I'm sure I'll hear more about it in Cheyenne when we go down and talk and visit and so on. It's been a really interesting conversation.
So, Carter, I haven't had any conversations. I just read the brief quotes in the paper. So it sounds like by us disposing of these, we are somehow making it more possible for wind energy to get a foothold, and therefore attacking the coal industry. Is that kind of the reasoning?
That's the way I'm reading it too.
That somehow we should not in any way be aligning ourselves with this hated industry? Is that?
Well, you know, it's, Madam Mayor, Councilman, it's hard to understand the motivation with respect to some of the legislation that's out there right now. Certainly, I think coal reclamation is fed into this as an alternative to municipal landfills being able to deal with it. And I don't understand why one is better than the other. That is unclear to me. I certainly believe, having seen some of the things that they put into empty coal mines and so forth, that our proposal is a much better alternative. However, what I would like to do is have the legislation on both sides of it defeated and allow us to continue to serve the public or the private sector as the private sector would see need to do so. And so that's where I hope that the sweet spot will be. And frankly, it's a good business proposal for them and a great business proposal for us, because these kinds of revenues help us to keep local rates down. It really does. And that's been the secret for your oversight of that enterprise for a long, long time, finding those revenues that allow us the opportunity to keep local rates low. And in my opinion, that would be our mission, to keep the rates for our citizens as low as possible. And honestly, you have done a great job over the last 15 years in doing that.
Right. Sorry, Councilman Pacheco.
Can I say the senator's name?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Does Senator Anderson understand that it does bring revenue to the city of Casper, his hometown?
He does. I'm sure he knows now.
Yeah.
Because I think what's happening, people ask what's happening, it's multiple senators and House members making political statements is what all this legislature's turned into. And so instead of making pragmatic choices, decisions again for the budget that needs to be made, and this is coming from a centrist, that needs to be made in order for people to function in the state of Wyoming, i.e. the educational system that's down, what, $400 million or something like that? And I'm getting on my soapbox as a city council person, but they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that's affecting the city of Casper, and that makes me upset as a council member. So that's unfortunate. That's what's happening, and it's hurting our city.
Well, we did talk about that at our legislative dinner, but whether people remember that or not. And frankly, when I read that, I just thought, well, this is someone looking in the rearview mirror thinking that, well, that evil wind electricity is going to take over that good coal electricity. And to me, it's just absurd. You know, I mean, my personal view is that everything that I've seen and everything coal is dead, and as much as we might wish, much as we might not want that to be the case, that's a reality, because if you go down to Missouri, which used to buy a lot of Wyoming coal, and all they've got down there is wind and solar.
Yes.
And they're not going to be, you know, when they can build electricity there off of wind and solar, you can't tell me they're going to go back to buying Wyoming coal and hauling it down there. And that's just a reality, whether we like it or don't like it. But, you know, I read that in the paper and I thought, well, this is someone frankly looking in the rearview mirror instead of looking forwards. But that's just me being me. And
with gas being under $2,
yeah,
gas turbines, and you can't even convert a plant to gas for which you can build a new gas turbine for.
Councilman Pacheco.
So my hope, I can't go down obviously, and I know you guys are, my hope is that the conversation can be one of common sense. And I'm hoping that you guys can go down there and have that conversation to be like, look, here's this is a budget session, and I'm hoping you can go down there and have this reasonable, common sense conversation for what is the best interest of not only for the city of Casper, but for the state of Wyoming, making these choices. And I think that hopefully common sense will prevail, and so I hope you guys can go down there and do that.
Sounds good.
We'll try.
Any other items for legislative review?
No, ma'am.
All right, Counselor on the table, Councilman Hopkins.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Nothing for me.
I had a question that was presented to me at lunch today by Judge Christensen. And he was thinking in terms of, with the coronavirus and all that stuff. And recalling that several years ago there was a joint city-county kind of a task force that was in place to address if there was a pandemic that would strike. And I know that, when the city-county health people were here a week or two or so ago talking about the generators and the freezers and that kind of stuff. And maybe we should have talked to them about it. But maybe, Carter, would it be such a thing that somebody from the city staff could kind of look into whether that needs to be revived, if we need to bring about another conversation with those guys about that or whatever, because I know Judge Christensen indicated that he thinks he's the only person still alive that was on that committee back then. But he was really, and I thought, that we should kind of be worrying about that a little bit.
Sure.
Trying to be ahead of that instead of behind it.
Madam Mayor, Councilman, at the very, very least, I'm quite convinced that we can get a report from the health department. And if that report would engender some additional conversation, I have no doubt that Anna would be pleased to come in and visit with us again. You bet. If that works.
I think I've said everything I was going to. If I say any more, I'll get in trouble.
Oh, come on, get in trouble.
Flip the edge.
I did not go to the Casper Health Department. I stopped in, told them I wasn't going to be there because I attended the planning and zoning one. And there's a group that down on Allendale, Jefferson, 26, in a little triangle. Their plot is set up as a neighborhood 2 design, which is for a single and multifamily. They asked for it to be proposed for a R3, so a 1 to 4 residential. We're looking at putting some real nice kind of, not apartment, but duplex type place there. Big garage on one side, and then on Allendale you could walk to it. Anyways, they're going to be coming that passed by planning and zoning, so we'll see that coming to us. And then I attended the Casper Housing Authority board meeting, and that was actually really cool. Everything's going good for the most part. They're hoping they can work with the city regarding the fire system. With North Casper, that if they build some firewalls that they may not have to put in the system, and that will help them out tremendously. So that's really cool. But what's really cool is they have a kid campus that they follow under the food program, and she put out a 2018 versus 2019 report. I apologize, I was going to print this out and give it to you guys, but January of 2018 and February, the person that was leading that at the time did not do any counting of money for the food program. So the total that they had for that year of 2018 that they got reimbursed for the food that they promoted was around $35,000. Since they moved on with a new person that has came in and revamped it, They jumped up in 2019 for reimbursement of food of $44,000. So they changed their food. Kids are being fed, and I guess there's programs out there that are asking them how they're running Kids Campus because they have made such an amazing model. So that was really cool to hear from Casper Housing Authority that they're part of that, or they run that they increase the finances. They just continue to amaze me how well it's running. So that's all I have, Drew.
Councilman Powell?
I mentioned, thank you, Kristen. I mentioned last week that, briefly, that the DDA is facing some fairly significant financial challenges, and so just kind of a heads up that when they put that ice rink in, they have to rent a chiller, and it's very expensive to rent that chiller. The electricity costs, I believe, get up to around $3,000 or $4,000 a month to operate that chiller. That plus the fact that they promised that events that are sponsored by the DDA that people attend at no cost means that they are constantly struggling to basically pay for the entertainment that the citizens enjoy. And so plus they have a continuing obligation to provide the state with free space at the Ash Street building, and that they have to lease. How does that work now? The state leases it from the DDA, and the DDA leases it from us. Is that kind of how that works, Carter?
Actually, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, Councilman, the DDA bears that responsibility by themselves to lease from the city on behalf of the state.
And they get no money from the state because that's the deal that was made when the old taxidermy building was turned over to the DDA so that they could demolish it to build the Davis Speed Station. So there are these financial obligations that they have, really without a clear source of revenue. And so up to now, those fees have been paid with the capital campaign money that was donated to the DDA for the creation of the station, because their operating funds are woefully insufficient to take on those obligations. And so there's nothing coming to the city saying you need to help us with this, or we're not going to be able to operate the station under these conditions. There's nothing like that, but I just think people should be aware of the fact that the model may not be sustainable the way it's currently established. There still is their intent to break off the station from the DDA to create a separate 503(c)(b), if I said that correctly, and that would be a good thing. But it was the Warm Insurance, I think, that delayed that process, because they had to come up with their own insurance once they were out from under the arm of the city. So it's all good. But again, I think it's good for the council to be aware of the fact that we may have to address some of this somewhere down the road and figure out a way for the station to continue to operate. And they have they should own their own chiller for that ice rink, but there's no way that they could possibly raise the funds with their current funding model to buy a chiller. So those are some of the challenges that they're facing. And then just one other thing about downtown. We went downtown Saturday night, and we were driving down Ash Street. Every parking space was, most of the parking spaces were filled in the Goodstein lot. All of those establishments were pretty well attended, and we were reflecting back on when, even 10 years ago, you could drive down there and park anywhere you wanted because there was nothing going on and nowhere to go other than the movie theaters. And it was really pretty cool to see that much activity down there. And, you know, we can take partial credit for all of that. And should. So, that's it for me.
Councilman Kathy?
I got my deal about the plowing of the sidewalks. The other thing is I received an email from the Chamber of Commerce, and normally their board meetings were at 4 o'clock on the third Tuesday of every month, which allowed to go from 4 to 5 and make our 5:30 meeting. Effective April, they are moving their meetings to the second Tuesday of the month at 4 o'clock, which will probably preclude any representation from the city. I have sent an email waiting on a response back. Just thought I would pass on that bit of information.
Great.
And they were doing that to get it closer to their legislative committee meeting.
Nothing much from me, just in case anybody hasn't figured it out by now, the Harlem Globetrotters event at the Casper Event Center that was scheduled for tonight has been canceled. And so that has been moved to April 7th, just in case anyone's listening and planning on headed up there. And then probably just a side note, I'd say the CDC did actually issue a statement today about coronavirus, and it was, I think, good to read through just to know possibilities and what their outlook is and things to know as far as preparedness. Not anything scary or alarming, just the CDC knows what they're talking about, so it's good to read through that and just make sure that you're aware of the situation.
Where did you find that?
I believe it's just front page of the CDC's website right now, but I do believe like major news networks like MSN and things have shared this statement as well. And that's all I had. Anything, Carter?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Don't tell Steve, but you did a better job.
Hey, my whole goal was to get out of here in time to be the Harlem Globetrotters, and I did that, and they cancel it.
Why did it get canceled? You know why it got canceled?
The roads.
Probably.
I-25, I guess, is really bad right now.
This morning, the interstate was closed north and south out of Cheyenne to the Colorado line, I think, to Chugwater.
We've been off easy tonight, John.
I was surprised we got a payment.
He doesn't want to feel left out, right, John? Yeah.